I'm John. It's nice to see you all. How many of you watch CNN on an election night? So you know my friend. This is my friend. We call her Magic, or him. And 2008, we introduced the Magic Wall, and it has literally revolutionized television. Now, if you turn on a television, many of you, are too young to understand the progression of the change, but you cannot watch a show, whether it's a sports show, whether it's a political show, whether it's a news show. These things show up everywhere now. My point about the people you don't know and you don't see, don't get enough credit, we have two of the members of our Magic Wall team, our digital team, New Media, we call them, back here, Caroline and Billy. Maybe they'll come out, maybe they won't. Billy roots for Michigan. Is that okay on the George Washington campus? Billy's a big Michigan fan. So I'm going to spend 8 or 10 minutes here. I have a clock right here. Just showing you how this works, to show you what a great information tool it is for me on election nights. On election nights, it's live data. It's all coming in live. And so I could be standing here talking to Wolf or Jake or somebody, and it's blue, and then it turns red, right? What does that mean? It means more Republican votes came in, and the lead switched, or vice versa. Tonight, I just want to use it to sort of set the stage for what we expect. And I've been doing this for almost 40 years. This is the most complicated midterm election of my lifetime. That goes back to the mid-1980s. Just because we have conflicting data points, because the stakes are so enormous, and just because so many different pressures and fractions at play everywhere. So I just want to go through some basics. First, this is the Senate. You all know this. It's a 50-50 tie right now. So the Democrats control it because of the Vice President of the United States. She breaks ties. Republicans 6 months ago thought they were going to get 52, maybe 53 seats. Now, most of the smart people, and beware of smart people, and I don't mean to say they're not smart, it's a really difficult year to figure out. But most of the range of pickups now are +1 or -1 for the Democrats, meaning the Republicans either get to 51 or the Democrats maybe get to 52, or it stays 50-50. There are a lot of smart people in both parties who think it's going to stay 50-50. Now that's based on today, 20 days out. But this is all it takes, right? So this is a Republican-held seat in Pennsylvania. The Republican incumbent is retiring. This race gets a lot of attention. The Democratic candidate, Lieutenant Governor, interesting guy, not a traditional politician, had a stroke in addition to that back late in the primary. So John Fetterman gets a lot of attention. So does Dr. Oz because he's a celebrity TV doctor. Some people like that, some people don't. Trump endorsed him. That was an issue in the Republican primary. So this is a fascinating race. But if you think about it from the math perspective, I do math on election nights, Democrats have 50. What they would love to do, especially early on, right? You go east to west as polls close, is pick one up because you might lose one somewhere. So if you can do this and pick one up, right, what happens then? Let me come back to here and come on out. Then you're at 51, right? So if the Democrats can boost their numbers somehow in the east as we go west, because Democrats are very nervous about this one out in Nevada. Democrats are increasingly nervous in Nevada, and they're worried this might happen out there. And so that's the chess game that's going to play out on election night. This is all hypothetical. I don't know what's going to happen on election night. I never do. That's the magic of it. But this is, so if you're the Democrats, you're thinking, can we pick that up? Right? That's why the Democrats, there was a debate last night in Florida. There's a surprisingly competitive race in North Carolina. Democrats are thinking, can, lightning strike somewhere? Can we have a little magic and get a pickup of one of the ones that when you come back to where we actually are right now, can you pick up one of these reds? Right? Because you might lose some blues. You could lose Georgia. You could lose Nevada. You might lose Arizona. Colorado has become very competitive for the Democrats. So the chess game is, early in the night, which party has the advantage, and then we go from there. For those of you who remember 2020, I would just say, be prepared. I hope it's not election week in America again, but be prepared for election days in America again. I want to get to a couple of your questions before I bring out my colleagues. I don't want to keep them waiting too long because they're really great and they're really smart and they can really help us go through this. But I just want to go through a few of the questions to use the magic wall. Michael asked this question: which congressional districts should we look at to see any indication of the night? So that's a great question. It's a great question, and it's what I have to think about as I prepare for election night. So let's look at it this way for the House battle of control. This is where we are right now. You see these yellow districts? These are the districts we've determined with the help of Inside Elections, is a newsletter written by a great smart journalist, Nathan Gonzalez. These are what we view as the competitive districts. Some of them are true toss-ups. Those are the yellow ones. Then we have other districts, they're tilting Democratic or they're tilting Republican, but they're close enough. They're close enough, and the districts are competitive enough in terms of registration, in terms of past performance in both presidential and House elections, that we want to keep a close eye on. That's one way to look at it. I just want to come out to another map and look at it another way and come over here so you see again, if you're me on election night, polls close in the East, this is the House right now. You can do the math. You don't have to be a rocket scientist here. The Republicans only need 5. In modern times, in recent times, just go back, Obama lost 63 seats in his first midterm in 2010. Trump lost 40 plus, 42, 43 in the 2018 big Democratic blue wave there. So if you're the Democrats, you're nervous because history says, can you keep Republicans to under 5? In any year, in a normal year. Then you add in inflation, you add in all the other dynamics, the wind in the Democratic face, and it would be a pretty monumental, defying history for the Democrats to hold the House. This is one way we look at it. One of the things we'll do on election night is I showed you those competitive districts on the other map. Here they are on this map, so you can see them. Who owns them right now? Who holds them right now? You know, red, that's a Republican seat. I was in Pennsylvania a few weeks ago. There are a couple of big seats. Again, think about early in the night, do we get clues about what's happening? There are 2 Democratic-held seats right here. They're rematches of 2020. Matt Cartwright is the Democratic incumbent against the same Republican he ran against last time. Susan Wild, the Democratic incumbent, she came into power in the blue wave of 2018. She knows how hard it can be in the president's first midterm. She benefited from it when it was Trump's first midterm. She's got a wind in her face now that it's Biden's first midterm. This is another rematch. So early on, can the Democrats hold those seats when the results come in? If they can hold both of those seats, and this one out here, this is the Connor Lamb district out in western Pennsylvania, do you get a clue early in the night that the Democrats are performing strongly? Or if these go red, these are good, they're good Democratic candidates. I don't take sides in politics. I just mean they're good candidates. They've raised money, they run good campaigns, they're doing what it takes to be good on election day. If they lose, what does that tell us as we keep going west? So that's one of the ways the information in the map and in the wall helps me, both from a time zone perspective, and it is a live, amazing. I say it's fun, and people at home get mad at me because if you're an invested Democrat or you're an invested Republican, you're biting your nails. It's not fun for you. I get that. I get that. For me, this is fascinating. As a student of the game who has no horse on the track, election nights are fun for me because they're so challenging. This one is incredibly challenging to get through it. Another great question, which races polls have been surprising to you the most? Especially this close to an election, I don't like to talk about polls too much. Let's let the voters vote. But we do learn some things. When we come back to that other map, one of the things I would say is when you come back to the Senate, it has been, to me, in the Dobbs decision, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Some of you have several smart questions about the Dobbs decision. The Dobbs decision in late June changed the dynamics. We were heading toward what looked like a traditional president's, doesn't matter their party, go back through history in recent times. The only exception was George W. Bush. Right at the first election, 2002, was the first election after 9/11. His party, the country was still in crisis, his party actually gained seats. But if you look at this map right here, what has surprised me, I am surprised that North Carolina is so close, in the sense that Trump won it big just 2 years ago, and Sherry Beasley is in play. Does that mean she can win? I'm not saying she can win. Not my job. The Georgia races are incredibly close. A lot of people thought Herschel Walker was a flawed candidate. He's had character controversies in recent days and weeks that I'm sure you're all aware of, and yet it has stayed locked in. That tells us a lot about polarized America, right? That some people will stay in their partisan camp, and Democrats do too. I'm not picking on Republicans here. You see that in races. People just reflexively stay in their camp because they want to. This one, early on, was closer. There was a big debate last night. It's moved a little bit. States have DNA. Florida used to be more of a toss-up state. Ask Al Gore. It has become more red. Ohio's in the same place. That's another one to me that is fascinating in the sense that Tim Ryan has kept it very close in a state that, Trump won twice. You have a popular Republican incumbent governor. So there are some surprises out there that just tells me we live in an age of volatility, and we should be prepared for volatility on election night. At this point, I may get up once or twice during the conversation, but let me bring in my colleagues because they're awesome and they can help go through your questions, and they make me smarter to have them around. Nia Malika Henderson is our senior political analyst. There she is. And she's rocking, good kicks. Abby Phillip is anchor of Inside Politics Sunday, our senior political correspondent. And this is different and I think fun for us. Rachel Smolkin is here tonight. Rachel is one of those people who you don't see on television, right? You don't see on television. that in some ways makes her more important in the sense she's a senior vice president of global news for CNN, and for CNN Digital worldwide, it's the biggest growth industry of our business. Those of us who are on television like to think that, we're like the most important thing in the world to CNN. More people get their news online, and the global reach of CNN, that's why I work at CNN. The global reach of CNN is extraordinary, and Rachel is behind the scenes managing a team of amazing reporters and editors and digital people and visual people, and she's helped revolutionize CNN.com when you go to it, and it is a great piece of CNN success. And the thing I hope you all access and use quite frequently, because it is gold. It is journalist of gold. So let me get to the questions, and we'll start right here.
You need your glasses?
No, I don't actually at the moment. Thank you, though. This is the reason I like them, because they give you nothing here. This is a good one here. This has come up in several races. As America undergoes a demographic shift, how might the political environment change to consider the interests of Latino voters? Which party do you expect will receive the majority of their votes going into the future? It's our DNA to not go too far into the future, right? We follow the facts, not what we think. I'll tee it up this way and then turn to Nia Malika first. Donald Trump improved the Republican Party's standings among Latinos in 2020, particularly among Latino men, particularly in southern Florida. It's a different Latino population in southern Florida than you might find in the Virginia suburbs close to here, than you might find out in Nevada. But it is obviously an incredibly fast-growing piece of the American population, and a swing population. In Nevada, it's the big constituency, especially in Clark County. In other places, even when it's only 3 or 4% of the vote, if it's a 50-50 contest, that's enough, right? You win well among that big constituency, that's enough. So when you look at the map this year, or any particular race this year, that's the big question, right? Was that an aberration in 2020, or are Republicans starting to rebuild trust with Latinos?
Yes, and the rebuild trust, I think, is exactly right, because if you go back many decades to Bush and Reagan, Republicans did fairly well with Latinos. I grew up in South Carolina. The Latinos I did know in South Carolina growing up, not a lot of them at that point. Most of those folks were Republicans. So in many ways, it is a sort of rebuilding of trust and a sort of reversion to the way that Latinos often voted. I think the Latino vote will matter greatly in a state like Nevada, in a state like Texas, obviously, and in Georgia, which is increasingly diverse. I think the electorate will essentially be like 60% white, 40% non-white, with Latinos and African Americans and Asian Americans as part of that 40%. But listen, I think Democrats in some ways have taken Latinos for granted, in assuming that some of Donald Trump's rhetoric would draw them to Democrats, some of his rhetoric around immigration and Latinos more generally, but Democrats haven't necessarily done the work and considered how diverse Latinos are as a population, right? In Florida, they're very different than they are in Texas, for instance. And so you don't have a real sort of drilling down among Democrats to figure out how do you message to Latinos. It's not just about immigration. It's about small business. It's about education. It's about any number of issues. And so I think you're going to see this trend continue, particularly, as you said, with Latino men in this cycle. And I think Republicans have also been smart to recruit a lot of different people as their candidates, right? They have a very, very diverse pool of candidates who are running, particularly in the House, and that, again, goes away in terms of connecting different communities with their parties. So this is a concern, certainly for Democrats, and I think a boon I think we'll see for Republicans going forward.
And I would add to that, I mean, this is actually one of my little pet issues that I'm always thinking about, because I think it's one of the most fascinating political stories that's unfolding. It's Nevada, Arizona, parts of Texas, Florida, but then other places like North Carolina, parts of Pennsylvania, parts of states. I was just in Kansas. Latinos are the second largest minority population in the state of Kansas. They have a very competitive gubernatorial race in that state. But there was an interesting story that I just read about the race in Arizona, the gubernatorial race there, Kari Lake versus Katie Hobbs. And in the story, they talk about how some Latino voters are certainly turned off by Kari Lake, the Republicans' rhetoric around immigration, saying that there's an invasion, that the border is out of control. But some Latinos, including some recent immigrants who themselves came to the United States as immigrants or crossed the border seeking asylum or what have you, were not at all turned off by that for whatever reason. And I do think that so much of what we're seeing when it comes to non-white groups, Black voters, Latino voters, Asian American voters, is, the political system needs to grapple with the fact that some people, many people perhaps, are going to, their racial and ethnic identity are not going to be the number one thing for them. It might be other things. It might be what they consider economics, but it might also be things like religion. You could have people grouping themselves together, identifying as evangelicals or other things that define who they are and what matters to them. There's also a lot now in this country, a lot of biracial people whose racial identities in their own minds are ambiguous. And I think that some of that is really playing out. And I think it's confusing to people sometimes when they'll say, like, why would a Latino voter vote for a candidate who, maybe in your view demonizes immigrants? They may not think that issue is that important to them, and there may be differences within groups, different immigrant groups, not Mexicans maybe not identifying with Cubans, and so on and so forth. It gets complicated, but I think we're seeing that in the aggregate in all of these different places where voters are breaking off from their group behavior of the past and making different decisions. And I definitely think we will see a lot of that in this cycle. Nevada is a very competitive state now, when Democrats have won it in the last 2 election cycles on the presidential level. And that's largely because Latino voters are very unhappy about the economy. And if you ask a lot of Democrats, they would say that should not really be that much of a battleground state. And it very much is. It may even be more so at this point than Arizona.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so Abby used the word complicated, Rachel. As someone who has to plan and assign and hire and fight the mistakes of journalism past, right? The idea that, well, you're covering the Latino population, so you're going to spend most of your time on the immigration issue. This year and Trump 2020, I think Nia and Abby both are dead right. It's a lot more complicated than that. The constituency's a lot more complicated. There's a lot of diversity. So how do you come at that from who are we going to hire? Where are we going to put them? What stories are we going to cover?
I think Abby set this up so well by saying we can't make assumptions about the Latino electorate as a whole. And while there's an interesting overall story to tell in the aggregate about Latino voters, we also have to understand there are many rich storylines within that. And we can't make assumptions about the group as a whole. When you say the mistakes of the past, the media has tended to make some of those mistakes. We have to be really careful about understanding that Mexican voters and Cuban voters may feel very different, and within a group that people will feel very, very differently. So we can't paint too broad a brush with any group, including with Latino voters. So that's something that we have to be very conscious of. We have to make sure that in the stories we tell and the places we go throughout the country, we're keeping all of that in mind, and that we're really hearing from the voters individually and letting them put it in their words. We are not making assumptions about what people feel. We are asking them what they feel, and we have wonderful reporters like Abby and Nia out there doing those interviews and collecting that information.
So this one, I'm going to add a little bit to this question because it's a very good one, and my ad is going to be on where we are right now because of early voting. To get to the point about volatility and to Rachel's point about, we get paid to follow facts. We don't get paid to make assumptions. Do you think the uptick in voter registration in Georgia will affect the gubernatorial election? It's also let's affect all elections. I'll add that. And then the dynamic of early voting in the sense that, again, to Abby just made a very good point about Nevada. Democrats thought it was shifting their way. Well, maybe not, right? Now, or maybe it's going to slow. Maybe it's not going to go as quickly as they think. Joe Biden won Georgia, right? Despite what Donald Trump says, Joe Biden won Georgia, but just narrowly so. And then in the runoffs, Georgia elected a black preacher and a Jewish man to the United States Senate. If you had asked me 10 years ago, would Georgia do that they do it at all, never mind at the same time, I would have said, what? So states are changing, but political climate's always changed. So we see these long lines for early voting. if you take the 2020 model, you would say advantage Democrats. But we can't assume.
You cannot. Definitely not in Georgia.
Well-
And really nowhere in the country. I don't think the turnout in and of itself tells us anything anymore, because Republicans are turning out too. I did happen to be on the phone with someone who was in Georgia today, very well-connected person, a Democrat, who indicated to me, I mean, in their precinct, they went to vote early yesterday, and it was like the middle of the day. The lines were crazy long. So there is clearly, you're seeing the enthusiasm in the places where Democrats are, but I don't think you can rule out that that enthusiasm is also there in the more rural parts of the state, and also that the suburbs are up for grabs in Georgia. And you can't really say for sure that if you see long voting lines in the suburbs of Atlanta, how exactly that is going to play out in this particular environment, in which I think suburban voters now, because of the economy, and suburban women, white women in particular, are, they're giving Republicans a second look. And I think that that's playing out as we speak, as people are literally going out to vote.
You make a key question. In presidential years now, we almost never see ticket splitting anymore, meaning you pick a party for president and then you switch. When you vote for the United States Senate, you do something else. It used to be pretty common. It's non-existent in 2016 and 2020. I think it happened once or twice. I think we're going to see a lot of ticket splitting this time. I was talking to a pollster today who said she had a focus group where there was a Stacey Abrams, Herschel Walker voter. Try to, and she said, that's exactly what she said. She said, talk, keep telling me. So I just think you also have to remember, people have been through 3 years of stress, right? The pandemic stress, then the economic stress, whatever personal issues they may have their own right, or then their own political beliefs, that I think surprises and volatility are going to be the norm, which is why I'll come to you with this question here, Nia. Does the political climate favor Zeldin in New York for governor, a Republican candidate in a state that has been overwhelmingly blue, but every now and then goes Republican?
That's right. I mean, every now and then there's a surprise. I was in a meeting yesterday with some Republicans. They were sort of talking about the House races there, and they feel obviously good about the House, but also just talking about the gubernatorial race there and the anxiety that a lot of New Yorkers have, particularly around crime. A lot of folks thought, okay, Eric Adams, a former law enforcement guy, he ran on crime, ran on improving crime. And it looks like there's still a lot of anxiety around crime in New York. So sure, I mean, maybe this will be much more competitive than Democrats thought it would be going in. But there's just so many dynamics. Anytime I'm on a panel, I have to remind myself that we don't really know anything, right? We have these sort of anecdotal conversations. We talk to strategists and sources and voters, and we have polling as well, which, polls, great. There's a whole conversation to be had about the reliability of polls now, but we don't really know.
There's a couple questions in here about that.
Yeah, we don't really know, so we'll just have to wait to see where the voters go. But listen, I mean, if Democrats are in trouble in New York, I mean, they're going to be in trouble in all sorts of places around the country. So we'll just have to see.
Right. When I was doing those competitive House races earlier, and I said Pennsylvania will tell us early on, if Susan Wild can hold on and Matt Cartwright can hold on. Nia's point about New York, even if Kathy Hochul is winning the race for governor, how close is it?
Yeah.
If it's way closer than it has been in the past, that tells you something. It tells you Republicans are turning out, or it tells you independents are voting more Republican. Even sometimes the margins matter, even if a race doesn't flip. You're learning a lot about turnout, which brings me to, I think, a giant question, and maybe the answer is a little different now than it would have been in July or August, but maybe it's not, and it just seems that way. How big of a role do you think abortion will play in the midterms? Does the voter registration spike we saw in Kansas in particular seem to be happening elsewhere? Rachel, to you first on this one, in terms of stories that generate interest, right? You're right. We cover stories because they're news, but you see the reaction in the comments posted. When the Supreme Court wiped out Roe v. Wade and made Dobbs the law of the land and sent to every one of those 50 states, this is up to you now. What did we see in terms of news interest? And B, just in terms of thinking, okay, this is a big change in a political year. I had a plan. I need a new one.
Was a huge story. It was at the time. It was a historic decision. Our audiences are very smart and very engaged, and they always come when it's a big news moment, and they have almost 100% accuracy in showing us when that big news moment is happening. So we saw audiences very engaged, maybe a little less so on the issue now than when it first started, which is what we're seeing across the country. Again, we just don't know. We have a couple of anecdotal examples based on particular stories, but this race has been so volatile this year, and it looked like abortion rights would be the big driver, then it looked like the economy and inflation would be the big driver. Now maybe it's crime, as we were just saying in New York. We know that certainly Democrats and the president are really leaning into the issue of abortion rights. We know that with young voters and with certain groups of voters, it will particularly resonate, but we don't have a sense yet of how big a driving issue it will turn out to be. A few months have passed. Democrats were probably hoping to go with that as an issue right out of the gate, but now we're a few months later and it's just not clear anymore.
Jump in on that point, Abby, and let me throw this question into the mix because I think it's the flip side, if you will. Do you think the Dobbs Supreme Court decision will have the same increased voter turnout for pro-lifers as well as pro-choicers? That's a question, right? Do anti-abortion voters say, oh, we won, I don't need to vote? Or do they say, okay, we won by voting, we got this because we voted and Trump was elected and appointed all those judges, now what?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is definitely a possibility. The question is perhaps not whether they will be inclined to turn out, but whether it will be a greater effect than people who want to protect abortion rights. Again, sorry to say, but we don't really know. I actually was, as I mentioned, I was in Kansas about a week and a half ago on this very topic, just to see, Kansas is the state where in August they had a constitutional referendum on abortion that basically asked voters, do you want to keep protections for abortion in our state constitution? It surprised a lot of people when by 60% voters said, yes, we do want to keep this constitutional amendment. We don't want to get rid of it. And it raised a lot of questions about whether or not the kind of turnout. It was basically record or close to record turnout for a primary in that state. There were no other major races on the ballot. So people were coming out for the referendum, and the data suggests that women registered, new women, younger women registered for the first time. There was even an uptick in Latino registration for that referendum in Kansas. And in order for anything to pass in Kansas, a lot of Republicans have to go along with it. And there were a lot of moderate Republicans who did not want to change the state's constitution. So, but that all being said, I went down to Kansas, looked at how the Democrats were running. The Democrat for governor is running on the economy. She is not running on abortion. She's not running away from abortion, but she is not running on abortion. And I think it does tell you that for Democrats, abortion is a really important tool in their toolbox to bring out their voters, maybe to open up a conversation with some voters who are moderate, who are concerned about the issue and are up for grabs, but it's not going to be the issue that for most voters is going to decide how they cast their ballot. And so they have to shore up their economic messaging and cannot rely on abortion. But there's no question in my mind that many Democrats across the country, in all kinds of different states, red states, blue states, purple states, what they're seeing with moderate women, some of whom might be registered as Republican or independents, is that this issue does matter to them. Mm-hmm. They do not want to see largely more stringent abortion laws than might already exist where they live. And so that is a way in with those women who who Democrats in particular need in order to win. And the anti-abortion world is already fired up. They are coming out to vote. And I think the polling, frankly, just suggests that in terms of just sheer numbers, there are just more Americans who generally support some degree of abortion rights than the other way around. And the question is, will they vote on that?
And to that point, I'm going to bring this question up. Abby made the point about the moderate women who might be Republicans or might be independents, or might be soft Democrats who are mad about inflation or disappointed for one reason or another about Joe Biden. But how is the issue of abortion going to affect swing states? I think that is the big test. The Philadelphia suburbs, the Atlanta suburbs, in these big races for governor and Senate. Does it matter in the place that decides close elections?
Yeah, I think it does. And I think, obviously Joe Biden came out yesterday or the day before and said if the Democrats keep control, they would obviously have to not only keep control of the House, but grow their margins in the Senate, that they would want to codify Roe v. Wade. They clearly want to make this an issue. Part of it, I think, for Democrats is that when you talk about abortion and the GOP stance on abortion, they think that the GOP stance on abortion is a signifier for Republicans being extremists in other areas too, right? So in that way, they can message this to the swing voters, college-educated white women in particular in some of these suburban areas. And sort of the reality is women get abortions, men take women to get abortions, Republicans get abortions, Democrats get abortions, independents get abortions. And so I do think it'll be a motivating factor. I think it was especially helpful for Democrats in the summer when there were stories about abortions in the news. Particularly, there was the 10-year-old girl who was raped, and this was in Ohio, and she had to go to Indiana and get an abortion. Those sorts of extreme stories, I think, very much landed with average Americans, and I think led to some of the polling we saw about abortion being a top issue. Those stories have in some ways faded, but you do see Democrats running on this. In Bernie Sanders' mind, maybe running on it a little bit too much and not having the kind of economic message. But I do think in these areas, these suburban, we always talk about it, whether they're soccer moms or security moms or however you want to call them, but those are the true swing voters, and they're going to determine these elections.
So let me bring up another name. This is Joe Biden's first midterm. He's the President of the United States, but the other guy is in the news a fair amount. Two questions about this. Rachel, to you first, in the sense that you make a plan, and then the news environment changes your plan. I knew Trump was not going to go away, but even I'm a little surprised at how much he is in the news. It's in the diversity of the news about him. But two questions. How has Trump's subpoena impacted the races and the candidate he's endorsed? How do you think and the second one, how do you think Trump's influence will affect the upcoming midterms? In terms of coverage and planning, we cover the news objectively to the best we can. We're not perfect, but we cover the news objectively the best we can. But in that process, you're making hundreds of subjective decisions, like what goes on the front page of the website. Trump's been nudging his way in a fair amount.
Yeah, that's fair to say. We have these discussions really daily about what is the right amount of coverage, how do we frame the stories. Obviously, even today there has been news. Some of the news is directly related to the campaign trail. Some of it is related to lawsuits and depositions and Mar-a-Lago searches. So the news is coming in a lot of different forms, some with a clear direct effect and some we just have no idea whether there will be any effect. Certainly the former president's involvement has changed the shape of the race. We find ourselves writing a lot about election deniers and people like Kari Lake, but it's also brought to the forefront of the news a group of people that we normally don't pay so much attention to in midterm elections: the secretaries of state, the attorney generals, the officials who are protecting voting in America, and the threats that many of them have undergone, and what that looks like, and how you make sure the votes are counted in the right way. This is something that in past elections, yes, we would talk a little bit about, but we've devoted much more attention to secretaries of state than we have in years past. So you see the sometimes direct effect of Donald Trump, and then you see all the ripple effects and the way that it affects really the whole framing and coverage of the race.
And these are Donald Trump's candidates,
That's
right?
right.
I mean, Herschel Walker, J.D. Vance, Tudor Dixon, Blake Masters,
Dr. Oz.
Dr. Oz. I mean, these are his hand-picked candidates, and to the extent that Republicans win or lose, particularly in the Senate, they're either going to credit Trump or blame Trump, because these are the candidates that he wanted to see.
You know what's striking to me, though? Just as you were talking, Rachel, I was just thinking, because I mean, I was at the White House covering Trump when he was president, and it felt like a never-ending series of investigations and impeachments and Mueller, and now, even when he is not president, it's still a never-ending series of investigations and impeachments, and like it's wild, actually. I think the degree to which Trump is not just in the news, but he's in the courts. Like, he's in these really complicated, ongoing, long-term stories. And I don't know, I mean, Rachel, you may know better than I do. I actually wonder sometimes how much the public is following some of this stuff, the twists and turns and the ins and outs, that even I, who pay attention to this quite a lot, lose track sometimes of where things are headed and which FBI probe is related to what. And I mean, and that's not even counting the probes that involve his social media company that he's maybe trying to sell. And so there's a lot going on with Trump at all times. Much of it is very legal and very in the weeds. And so if it feels like we haven't like exited the Trump era, it's because we literally have not.
And,
You can't,
and
because
we-
you can't.
No.
You can't.
can't.
There are a lot of
There's
Democrats, they
news
stopped talking about him. You know, he's planning to run for president again. He's still the most influential person in the Republican Party. These stories, these issues, these controversies are real, and they're about real things. This is not, you know, People Magazine trying to keep some celebrity, you know, in the news past their prime. I'm not criticizing People Magazine. It's not that kind of journalism. It's legit. Do we have to have conversations about the balance? Yes, but
I will say, I think People Magazine does a very nice job. But I think, you know, to Abby's point, it's the news of what happened, but then we also spend a lot of time talking about how do we do stories that actually help audiences keep up? Because to your point, there is so much and it's complicated and there are a lot of twists and turns. So are we stepping back and connecting those dots for audiences so it doesn't feel like they're just being hit with news in all directions, but that we're really helping them navigate those different stories and put all the pieces together?
I would make one other point, because Rachel and Abby and you all touched on this. And this is you know, you might see I have a little bit more gray hair than everybody else up here. I've been doing this for nearly 40 years, and I've lived through at my prior job and at this job for 25 years, the conversation about media bias, and we can talk about that if you wish. But I know where I work, and I know the people on this stage very well. We're not anti-Trump or pro-Biden. We get criticized sometimes for spending time on these stories, especially the Secretary of State issue or the election stuff. We have to be pro-truth. Whether any of you want to get into journalism or government, public service, thank you if you do. Thank you if you do. Our institutions are under attack. Math is under attack. 2 + 2 is 4, no matter who the President of the United States is. The person who gets the most votes wins in a democracy. That cannot change. That cannot change. And so we have to repeatedly say, that's not true. Sometimes we have to say, that's a lie, when people who know better keep saying things. And it puts, you know, we get criticized for it. I won't stop doing it because that's what I do. I've been doing it for a long time, counting votes. Joe Biden won. Donald Trump had every opportunity and took every opportunity to ask for recounts where it was allowed. He never, ever be mad at any candidate who does that. That's their right. We have systems and rules for a reason. Ask for another one. You know, do everything you can. Go to court 70 times. All of them thrown out, including a bunch of Trump judges threw them out. And so to say Joe Biden is the President of the United States is not controversial. It's a fact. It's a fact. To say he got more votes is not controversial. The people who count votes, Democrats, Republicans, the county election officials, they don't get paid much money. Some of them are getting their lives threatened now. So there's a threat to democracy and fact and truth that I hope all of you, especially the young people, no matter what you get into, no matter what your politics, please vote. If you're Republican, vote Republican. If you're Democrat, vote Democrat, whatever you want to do. But remember that. basic rules. If we do not have a process and a law and a whistle, if there's not a whistle to end the game never ends. And politics is not a game. I'm just trying to use a sports metaphor. I try to use it sometimes to break through to some people who still think, that Donald Trump should be president of the United States today. That if we don't have a process where it's over, Al Gore knew, he lost at the Supreme Court. He still thinks he got the most votes. He still thinks he should be president, should have been president of the United States. But he respected the process. Everything collapses if we don't have that. Sorry for that, but that one gets under my skin a little bit. This is a question, you brought this up earlier, so I'll start with you. Polling was far from accurate in 2016 and 2020. Can polling be seen as an accurate predictor of the outcome of the midterms? I'll quibble with the question just a little bit. Polling was not grossly inaccurate. If you think of polling as an exact science, Joe Biden was up by 2.1 points, and he won the state by 10, or Trump won the state by 1, therefore that poll is wrong. No. It's data. Data science tells you there's a margin of error. We want everything to be exact in our lives. There were some places where the polling was off, and Republican pollsters especially, but all pollsters have identified that some people who are told, don't vote early, don't trust the media, there is a participation question, issue, challenge for pollsters among, I'll call them Trump Republicans, but they're not just Trump Republicans. But polling, by and large, was pretty accurate if you accept the margin of error. But it has become a source of legitimate, I think there's less public polling by media organizations in the states now because they think it's not worth it, that they're just going to get hammered.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, I guess Nate Cohn had a story up about this, I think it was last week. It's increasingly hard to get people to participate in polls, right? I think he was saying something like it takes a day to actually get somebody to get, 24 hours or so to actually get somebody to answer the phone and actually respond to a pollster. Listen, I think given what we've seen over these last years, there is more skepticism around polls. Hopefully there is more an informed look at polls, and people do look at them and notice the margin of error. I have to say that for me as a journalist, I feel like we have moved away a little bit more from polls. We used to be much more polling centric. We would have a day or two of polling coverage after we would release a poll, and we got burned, some of us, by relying too heavily on polls. I remember CNN, I think it had a poll showing Andrew Gillum up by like 9 or 10 points in that Florida governor's race in 2018. We obviously all know how that turned out. And I have to say, when I look at polls, if I see a poll where someone is up by like 7 or 8 points in like the Wisconsin Senate race, for instance, I'm like, this is not real, right? It's just not real. I think in some poll, Warnock is up over Walker by like maybe 6 points or 4 points. That also just seems unrealistic. Jamie Harrison down in South Carolina, that race that he was in for Senate, he was up in some polls. I'm from South Carolina. I never believed any of those polls because it just seemed unlikely. So I think we all are a bit more skeptical around polls, and we should be. They aren't meant to be predictive. They're meant to be a snapshot in time of a select group of people who answered a phone from a stranger and talked to them and gave them their opinion about who they would vote for. So I think we have learned as the public and as well as the news media to look at polls more skeptically, use them more wisely.
And how we're covering the polls, right? I mean, that has changed a lot, and we don't want to put too much emphasis, to Nia's point, on any one poll, because any one poll can be misleading. So if we're going to be in the space, at least if we're showing an aggregate or giving audiences a sense of these 3 polls that just came out, here's what they seem to tell us at this moment in time, knowing that things might change and it might be completely different in 3 weeks anyway. And I think also really emphasizing to our audiences the margin of error. If a candidate is within the margin of error, they are not ahead. They are within the margin of error. And I think we shorthanded that a little too much in years past, and we've really worked to be more precise because we need to lean into the limitations of the poll. Yes, it's a tool, but maybe it tells us a little bit more than we knew before. Maybe it doesn't. But either way, it's a moment where explaining what we don't know or what the limitations are is just as important as saying what we think the numbers tell us at a given moment in time.
look at the trajectory, not the numbers, right? Is the president's approval rating up compared to the last one? Are there 3 or 4 polls out there? One of them might show a 6-point swing, 1, 2, 1, 1, but are they in the same direction? Look at trajectory. Don't invest overall in the numbers. And like we average polls, right? So don't trust any one. It's a snapshot of that moment. All right, here we go. What are your thoughts on the recent trend in Republicans running far-right campaigns, but Democrats having to moderate themselves in order to keep the races competitive? That's an interesting take.
Oh, I see. Well, I think I gather where the questioner is coming from. I think it has a lot to do with just different objectives for the two parties. I think one of the side effects of Trump has been that the theory of the case right now for Republicans by and large is that if you turn, they think if we turn our people out and that's it, we're good. Like we'll be fine. We'll do really well. So they're really trying to run a Trump-like campaign. Although I think many of them find that there are limitations to that because they're not Trump, so they can't bring people out in the same way. I think there are a lot of Republican candidates who, in some states, do not feel like they need to pivot to the center for a general election. They're not aiming to do too much persuasion on the belief that there are enough Republican and Republican-leaning voters that it would be enough for them. I think like a Carrie Lake is a good example of that. It might be enough for her in a state like Arizona. But if you're Dr. Oz in a state like Pennsylvania, that doesn't really work. He's had to tack to the center because Pennsylvania is just not that kind of state. Democrats, I think, on the other hand, recognize that they need their people, plus they need to persuade some people in the middle. And so I think that they run their campaigns based on that belief, based on their version of the math. But I mean, just if you pay attention to my language here, their version of the math, like these campaigns and these political parties, they kind of have to decide when they go into these races, what do they need to do? Do we need to persuade people? Do we need to turn people out? Do we need to do a combination of the two? I think Republicans largely in this country right now are very much in the turn out our people theory of the case because of Trump. Right. Democrats can't be of that mindset because they know that they have to win over independents. They saw what happened with Hillary Clinton in 2016. And so they're operating on those assumptions, and we will see who turns out to be right. It will work for Republicans in some places, and it won't work for them in other places. I think it's very state by state. In some cases, it's very district by district, how that will turn out. But one part of it also is that the average Republican congressperson in this country is running in a deep red district. They are not running in any way, shape, or form where they have to convince people somewhere in the political middle. So that's part of the reason why you're seeing that is that generally, the result of redistricting has been that Republicans have had a wide swath of the country to draw districts in, and they've drawn those districts to their great advantage, and that means that most of their candidates don't have to tack to the middle. It's different when you get to the Senate, it's different when you get to gubernatorial races, but that's probably why you're seeing that on the Republican side and less so on the Democratic side.
And I think the problem that Democrats have, particularly in midterms, is they are relying on voters who don't show up at the rate in midterms that they show up in presidential elections. So Democrats need young voters to turn out in a great margin. They sort of don't turn up at the same rate. Republicans are relying on old, reliable voters, and I mean old voters, really. And so I think Democrats have to, kind of tailor their message much more so than Republicans because of their voters just aren't as reliable in midterm elections.
And yet, back to the planning part, this raises to me one of the fascinating questions about this midterm election cycle, because we saw very high relatively, historically. I think American voter participation is actually pathetic, and I wish it would be much higher than it is. Everybody should vote. Everybody should vote. Everybody who's eligible to vote should vote. But we did see relatively increased turnout in 2016. then a 2018 midterm election that turnout was also considerably higher. A lot of that was Democrats coming up because they were mad at Trump, but Republican turnout was not terrible in 2018. Then you had 2020, which Trump got more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016, and he still lost the popular vote by a larger margin because more Democrats came out. But Pennsylvania is my laboratory for that. The Trump voters came out of the woodwork in that state, and he still lost it. And so that's one of the questions from a planning perspective. When you see this early voting, when you do see, someone asked the question earlier, we know that right after Dobbs, registration of women, people in the suburbs, did go up. Has that been sustained all the way through? That's one of the unpredictables in terms of the planning. Do we live in an age of higher participation? I still don't think it's high enough, but higher participation. Or do we get a traditional midterm where it drops off, particularly among the Democratic constituents? If it drops off, then Republicans will take the House, Republicans will probably take the Senate, and Republicans will win more of the governor's races. If it's up again, we got a long week.
Right. And this is something, I mean, it looks like early days, early signs, it looks like from what we're seeing in these initial numbers that the electorate is engaged, that we're seeing similar numbers to 2018 and maybe not 2020 because it's a presidential election year, but to the 2018 cycle. The question is, will that hold? What will it look like a few weeks from now? We don't know what the effects of the pandemic will be and the way that has changed voting. That was a major issue in the presidential election and the mail-in ballots. Are people going to revert back to older habits? Has COVID permanently changed the way people vote and how they show up? So that's a question and a storyline we need to follow. It's the voting itself, it's how they vote, it's when they vote, and these are all questions, and of course where the voters are coming from. And John, this is something that you do so well, and I always admire this when you're explaining the magic wall on election night, looking at where are the votes coming in and what do we know so far. And it might look like things are moving red, but we don't have these votes from these key cities. And I think that'll be particularly important as we get to election night, because we don't know where that will end up, and something might look very different early on in the night or at midnight than it looks at 3 a.m.
Right. To that point, we're going to have a very similar election night here than 2020.
Election week
election day.
month or...
Yeah. Well, there could be a runoff in Georgia on December 6th, a month later, if the candidate has to get 50% plus one in Georgia, so it's possible we have a runoff there. But also, to Rachel's point, if you remember election night 2020, Donald Trump was winning in some states that we knew were going to turn blue, and he was ahead, leading in states that ended up turning blue, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona among them. And at one point, Joe Biden was leading in Ohio, he was leading in Texas, and he was leading in another red state. And, you know, Democrats are texting like, oh, my.
Florida first.
Yeah, Florida. It's like, oh, my. Some states count election day ballots first. Yeah. Some states count the mail-in early voting. Mail-in or early voting cast ballots first. And that, because Democrats voted so disproportionately early in 2020 and Republicans voted on election day disproportionately in 2020, that's what happened. In the end, they counted all the votes and we got to the facts. But this is part of the Republican conspiracy theory that, you know, they brought in votes in Detroit and they brought in votes in Pennsylvania and they flipped it. No, it's just the way that state counted the vote in a certain order and other states counted them in a different order. You don't hear Joe Biden saying, I won Ohio and Texas and Florida, because they understand how the process worked. But it's complicated because states decide how to do it. Each state does it its own way, and so it can be very interesting. This is a great question, especially because there was an interview in Punchbowl today by Leader McCarthy, who could be Speaker McCarthy, about Republican agenda priorities. And I was thinking about it all day, really. Are Democrats, you know, taking advantage of or trying to frame things in a way that sometimes they get opportunities from in these interviews? Well, Democratic candidates struggle in elections due to a poorly performing economy and a propensity to blame the president, and by extension his party. How will Democrats defend their economic positions, and what solutions can they put forward? A part of it is their solutions. Part of it is midterms are normally a referendum on the president, the guy in power. Can you make it a choice? Can you say, you're mad at me, but these guys will do that?
Yeah. I mean, I similarly, John, we were on the same page today. I was thinking about Leader McCarthy today, too. And also just thinking about, like, we really don't know what Republicans are going to do if they're in power. And the voters should probably know that so that they can make a decision about what they want. It is interesting. I mean, I think you've seen the Democrats trying to do this choice thing, by talking about, Senator Rick Scott's plan that he had put out some months ago. The way Democrats describe it, he would basically put entitlements up for a vote every 5 years. He would implement, and actually this is what the plan says, he would implement a pretty regressive tax for like lower income people. And so Democrats are trying to run on that. I have to say, I don't really think that is sticking very much. I don't think most voters know what we're talking about when we say Senator Scott's plan. But it just encapsulates how hard it is when you are the party in power. And it's just very easy for people to cast blame than to give you credit for things that A, you haven't done, or B, that maybe you have done, but they don't feel the impact of it. And so it is just a difficult thing that they are trying to do. But I mean, just from our perspective as journalists, I mean, my thought today was this interview in Punchbowl that Leader McCarthy did and other reporting that's out there. There is a kind of need to empower voters with an actual understanding of what the parties are actually going to do. Like, what are Republicans actually running on in terms of how they are going to lead? And I think that in the next few weeks is going to become, I think it needs to be part of the story of getting into the midterms here to help empower voters.
We have hit the clock here. I'm going to use the authority invested in me by absolutely nobody to extend this, to extend it just a minute or two to give each of my colleagues just a chance. And if I didn't get to your question, I'm sorry. I tried to get to as many questions as I could in the time we have because they're all fantastic, and thank you for them, even if we didn't get to your questions. Just to give each of my colleagues, I'll start with Rachel, just come around in order, just a chance, just a closing statement of your choice about your job, about any message to the young people here, about a surprise in this year. Take 30, 45 seconds, say whatever you wish. The floor is yours, Senator.
Oh, wow. I love elections and election coverage. It's one of the most important and exciting things that we do, and especially to get to do it at CNN with such amazing and talented colleagues where I learn so much every time I listen to them. It's a really important moment also to remember that we don't know. We shouldn't predict because we're not good at that. And all we can do really is help our audiences understand how things might play out. Not in the way of speculating what will happen, but just to point out, here are some factors we're looking at. Here's what we're watching for. Here's how this might come in. And that's the best guidance I think we can give to audiences, to explain what we're paying attention to and also what we don't know that might change the outcome. Because for everything we say, 10, 12, 20, 100 factors could change where we think we are at that moment. And so we really think of this as presenting a guide. This is a public service, and it's a responsibility that we take very, very seriously to try to provide the best possible information we can to audiences so that the voters can make their decision, whatever that decision might be. And it's a privilege to get to do that work.
And I also love elections, mostly because it brings an end to the speculation most of the time. And I think that that's good for all of us. I just want to say that, I mean, this year, look, the turnout so far seems to be indicating that people think this is a very important election, and it is. And it is going to be an incredibly consequential election, and it might take a little while. I'm just going to tell you that because the transparency is important. Like, this may not be, probably will not be done on the first night because of the dynamics that John was just talking about. But one thing that I can tell you that I'm very proud of how we handled this in 2020 at CNN, we will be transparent with you about what is going on, about why you're seeing what you're seeing, about what we are expecting to happen in terms of what is coming to us in terms of votes. And so hopefully you guys will be watching. But that's, I think what we will try to give you is not any easy answers, not quick fixes, no predictions on election night, but just some transparency about what's going on as we wait for the voters to decide, because ultimately that's all there is to it. It might take a day or two or three, but we will get an answer at the end of the day. And throughout that process, I think what we do really well at CNN is not treat it's like a little bit of sausage making, but it's actually central to the story in this cycle, just like it was in 2020. And we will make sure that you have the information that you need in a way that you can digest it so that you can understand what's going on.
Yeah, and I would say, listen, we love your viewership and we're so glad you came out tonight. And I think for me, I would encourage everybody to talk to as many people as you can to learn about the issues and how people are feeling about the issues. We are obviously experts and we read polls and we talk to sources all the time, but oftentimes you can learn a lot about how people are feeling in the country by talking to the person who rings you up at Target, or talking to your Uber driver, or talking to the woman who collects your garbage. That's how I've learned about the country. That's how I learned about how actually people are feeling about the direction of the country. So that's what I would say. Listen, we obviously love your viewership and we hope you watch on election night. We'll all be there.
Amen. I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you for the smart questions. And I should have said at the beginning, thanks for those of you watching out there on the interweb, in the Streamverse. Thank you. Thank you for your time and attention as well, and your interest. To the students, I would just say, we need you, whatever you decide to do when you get out of here. It's a cynical time in America in many ways. It's a volatile time in America economically, culturally, and so on and so forth. It's easy to say it doesn't matter. We need you. We need you, and we need your fresh ideas. We need your interest in technology. You're the generation that is just naturally so much more tolerant and open-minded than the generations that came before you. Keep that. Keep that. Vote. No matter what your politics, please vote. The last thing I'll say is I want to thank my patient son. He's not a college prodigy here. Jonah King, my 11-year-old, wanted to come participate and listen tonight, and I appreciate his patience there in the front row. His mom, by the way, is the fabulous Dana Bash, an alumni of this great university. So thank you, son, and thank you all for coming. Thank you all for coming.